Mountain City. Hello, folks. Hello. Mountain City had a long history so long that nobody in the modern era certain was sure when it was founded. Some even thought the city, that the oldest buildings, things of the city dated back to before the cataclysm that brought the world low. Many believe the city had, through its history, the known history of the city was quite violent, and it had a long reputation as a place where decent people didn't want to live. Home to lots of crime, criminal gangs, banditry, and poverty. It was joked that many people didn't even make it to Mountain City, to the rough streets of Mountain City. Thanks to the bandits, the hordes of bandits that called the roads in and out of the city home. These people, it was joked, many people were indeed ambushed and murdered on those roads. Murdered and robbed on those roads through the years. It was likely those bones. There were great hidden graveyards. Along those roads, most of which the mountain passes in particular were home to a great tug of war between the traders and their bandit foes, which was at times in history as intense as an actual war. During the war, the warlords, during the Warlord War, aka the Jade Civil War, the city was home to many intense skirmishes before a final grand battle through the straits put it in the hands of the future Jade Emperor. The more I talk about the Jade, the more I regret not having them as the Japanese in my other story, but then I would have to explain why they're coming back for a second huge war after being defeated in the last one, and why they didn't use all this advanced technology they had in that war, in this war, in that war. I mean, it's only 3 years later. It's not a matter of decades. They're fighting through the sea during the Jade War, the invasion of the Jade continent, and Operation Dreadnought. A horrifying name for a ship, right? The Dreadnought. Ugh, gives me the willies. Better take some of my pills. There. Much better. Let's see. Operation Dreadnought. The city was attacked first by Zedin and Chromish paratroopers. Coincidence were dropped to seize strategic buildings in the city. This operation largely failed due to the unexpected, stubborn resistance resistance of the during the war. Battle of resistance of the garrison, which included many vengeful veteran troops. Not a glut of militiamen, as the spies in the city claimed. These spies in the city claimed the failure of the paratroopers led to a much tougher fight later on. Yeah, I should have you think they would have dropped more paratroopers in? It's probably like a standard thing in world wars, you know? But, you know, everybody had troop shortages back then, even the U.S. Army. They didn't have enough soldiers for what they wanted to do, you know? It's crazy, you'd think. I think if anyone could scrounge up enough troops for a major war, it would be the Americans. But, you know, the failure of the paratrooper fighter later on, when armored, motorized, and infantry forces attacked the city through multiple entrances. The defenders at the perimeter put up a stiff resistance, but were eventually driven back. Then the fighting entered the city. Enemy resistance. Allied force troops stormed and cleared countless buildings, moving towards the city center. Enemy resistance. Jade resistance. Allied resistance continued for days after war's official end, with the defenders, with some units utterly refusing. With some units refusing to admit defeat. It was controversial when the Zedans declared themselves the conquerors of Mountain City, for it had been a coalition force that assaulted the city. Coalition force that assaulted the city. Chromish infantry, Fortish armor brigades, Grandish mercs. Not that they mind not getting credit, as long as they got paid. Brandish mercs. Merc stands for mercenary, in case you don't know. Mercenaries are a strange group. They're both lionized and demonized. Kind of like German soldiers, I guess. Like, some people respect them for their fighting prowess in the world wars, and others, you know, just view them as helping prop up a genocide machine. After all, the Holocaust wouldn't have been as deadly as it was if not for German military successes. If they had failed to conquer Poland, you know, millions of Jews might have lived. Who knows how World War II would have worked out if Poland had been victorious in that battle. Maybe Hitler would have been removed from power, and well, you know, let's worry about that some other time. South American Zedin Motorized Brigade. And a Canadian Infantry Brigade. And so on. All of these units bled. Bled as terribly as the Zedin ones. The Zedins did make up over 50% of the attacking forces, but some said would have been in poor taste for them to take credit even if they made up 90% of the forces. Actually, some of these Chromish, naturally there was some hypocrisy. See, in the eyes of the Zedins. Hypocrisy. Thousands, or 20,000, or 50,000 Zedin troops. Zedin troops perished liberating Chromia from the Jade, and yet that was proclaimed a Chromish victory. And South Zedin troops were lionized in their own lands. No matter how many Zedin troops were involved in the fighting down there, in the open or behind the lines, in covert operations that applied pinprick damage, small but gradual damage to the enemy. Let's see. The final fighters were killed, not captured, when the buildings they occupied were leveled by Chromish Zedin artillery. That's what the Russians were doing at the end of World War II. Instead of taking the buildings in Berlin that the Germans were defending, they just leveled them. And I can understand, why take those buildings when they're just ruins already? They had to bulldoze most of the buildings in Berlin. Let's not forget that the Germans dealt death and suffering as long as they could, right up to and after the end of the war. So, you know, it's definitely a case of you reap what you sow. The Germans didn't cry when they burned down Warsaw to rubble. Let's see, Jade security guard blocks. Yeah, I already did that one. And he wasn't a security guard. Mountain City was home to various memorials and shrines. Dead of the battle. A war museum was built and in 0050 and was a major tourist attraction. Thanks to all the amazing equipment on display, including a room dedicated to a large golem, infantry golem. There was a ladder that people could take up to the cockpit and sit inside, pretending they were a pilot for a little bit. There was rubble and corpses had been cleared from the city, and many new buildings had gone up since the war. but you could still see plenty of scars, not only on buildings, but on the people. There was still much bitterness among those Jade vets who had fought and bled in those very streets. The incident at the city research facility took place the people on the outskirts. Is it the outskirts of the city? Of Mountain City. Were able to hear the spark of the incident at MR, Mountain City Research Facility. They call it MR. RARF. That's like something a dog would say. RARF. It's MARF. RARF. Or something like that. Here to spark the incident, and word soon spread that something was going on. People had been wondering when the uprising on the continent would reach their country, release their private. The streets had been pretty quiet. Things seemed to balloon, spiral into chaos pretty quickly, with various shootings, bombings, and snipings on the streets, and sniping incidents on the streets of Mountain City. In less than an hour, the city seemed under. The attacks were directed exclusively at Zetan troops, but the citizenry still fled in fear and hid themselves away. Mountain City became a ghost town. Ghost town is not the right word. Mountain City became a ghost town. It seemed to be with only military men patrolling the streets. It was like that for hours as people stewed in their houses, as citizens stewed in their homes and listened on the radio or news, which was often not forthcoming. It seemed like there was a media blackout. The only instructions were for citizens to stay off the streets. Just saying, folks. Let's see. Jade vets. There are plenty of vets who did not move on from the war. They didn't get families, get married, have kids, or get fulfilling jobs. Many of them stayed among their fellow soldiers and they drank, smoked, played games, and reminisced about the old times. There were plenty of little clubs through Mountain City, made up of small groups of vets, Jade vets, who would meet at the nicest house, some house, whichever of them at one of their houses. Whichever one had the nicest house. Whichever house was the nicest. And just have a good time. Would meet up a few times a week. Fun and games. Usually played card games. Let's see, maybe fun and games. Many of them were trying to escape their bitterness over the war, their defeat, the country's humiliation. Often discussions turned down alarming roads, where men talked openly and plotting against applying against overthrowing the government, assassinating soldiers, Zedins, or the Jade traitors. Stockpiling guns, so on, for revolution. One of these guns called itself Animal Circus by its members, and was made up of a mere foursome. All were vets of the Jade War. Real vets, as they called themselves. They were men who had served in the thick of things, not rear echelon or supply or maintenance troops. It's troops who rarely carried a rifle with them, except when they scooted a little too close to the war zone, the fighting line. A very rare occurrence for them. Skipped the county fair this year. Maybe I should have gone. Maybe had a good time. Because there's been so many crazy incidents lately with shooters, you know. That died down for a while. All these copycat assholes running around. The group called themselves Animal Circus because they were made up of, because each of them had an animal nickname, and it was related to their branch of service. The leader, Bear, took his name because had been in the Armored Corps, the 38th Jade Armored Division, Empress Pride, was one of the earliest armored divisions, and formed by the Jade Empire Army. It was one of the few that survived the war, not ending up that survived the war to surrender to the Allies. Most of its sister divisions had been destroyed in combat. Apocalyptic in fierce combat. There's Tankhead. shredded, crushed, and gobbled up plenty of enemy soldiers through the years, his years of service. After Bear was Eagle, who was a member of the paratrooper forces, not a pilot like some thought his nickname. He the pilot of the group, the former pilot of the group, the former air fighter of the group, pilot of the group, was Wolf. There's some plot from his nickname. He had been in the 20th Paratrooper Force, which was destroyed and rebuilt as infantry before the war, as an infantry division before the wars, and Eagle had been badly maimed in the fighting, losing his right leg below the knee. The knee ended up shredded by shrapnel. It was a source of chronic pain for Eagle. Of the men in the group club, Eagle was definitely the most bitter. Ain't Phil. Let's see. After Eagle was Wolf, the air pilot who flew a jet fighter in the last war. Wolf was the name of his air squadron, and later his nickname, as he flew many missions in solo without a wingman. He was shot down 5 times in the war, ending up getting with a new jet fighter each time. He was far from the record for most times shot down. Twice he ended up deep behind enemy lines when he crashed, but he still made it back to civilization. It's 28 minutes in, so I can't introduce the whole group. Have a nice day.